The canyon swallowed every sound. The SEALs were declared lost, radio silent for 36 hours. Then, through the static, one last call cracked the air, and somewhere far beyond the ridge, a forgotten pilot heard it. You're watching The Storyscape, where lost calls still echo and legends rise from the static. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe no mission is ever truly over, make sure to subscribe. The Iron Pass didn't look like a battlefield from above. It looked like a scar carved into the planet, a thin wound of red stone that stretched for miles across the desert floor. Inside that wound, 6 SEALs clung to the last fragments of life and ammunition. For 36 hours they had been out of contact, buried under the canyon's silence. The last thing anyone heard was a broken transmission, half static, half breath, before the line went dead. At Forward Base Tanager, the command tent was quiet except for the drone of the generators and the hum of empty radios. Officers stood over flickering monitors watching empty frequencies roll by like heartbeats fading on a monitor. No one said it out loud, but everyone believed the same thing. The team was gone, consumed by the Iron Pass. At the far edge of the base, Captain Mara Keene sat alone in the open hangar, staring at the aircraft that had once been her reason to breathe. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, Specter II, rested under a film of dust, its paint stripped and panels scarred from a dozen missions. It looked more like a memory than a machine. Keene hadn't flown since the mission that cost her brother's life, a sortie that ended in fire over this same canyon. They had grounded her after that, called it trauma, called it instability, filed her name under evaluation pending. She called it exile. Every morning she came here anyway, sitting in the shadow of the old Warthog like a sentry who no longer had a post. That morning, a young comtech crossed the hangar without meeting her eyes and slipped a folded note onto the bench beside her. 3 words were scrawled in pencil: "Last call received." She stared at it for a long time, the letters blurring as something in her chest tightened. The Iron Pass again. The same coordinates, the same impossible valley. She rose without speaking. She didn't ask permission, didn't sign a manifest, didn't even look back. The past had just given her one more chance to make itself right. The crew chief saw her walking across the tarmac and froze. He knew that expression, the calm before a decision that no one could stop. Keene climbed the ladder, slid into the cockpit, and exhaled once as the canopy sealed her in. The air smelled of oil and dust and ghosts. Her fingers moved with the certainty of muscle memory. Master switch, ignition, fuel flow. The turbines groaned, then caught, a low growl that swelled into the unmistakable roar of a warthog waking from hibernation. Warning lights bled red across the console, fuel at 58%, hydraulics unstable, flares offline, but she kept going. She adjusted her headset, pushed the throttle forward, and felt the old beast begin to roll. Inside the tower, voices erupted through the static. "Unauthorized startup. Identify that pilot. Specter 2, you are not cleared for flight." The response was the thunder of engines climbing toward takeoff power. The A-10 lunged down the runway, trailing a veil of dust, the sunlight flashing across its wings like sparks struck from metal. She wasn't flying for command anymore. She was flying to bring them home. The radio kept shouting, but the roar swallowed every word. As the wheels left the ground, the base below fell away into a blur of sand and steel. Soldiers stepped out of their tents to watch, hands shielding their eyes, the sound rattling through their bones. Some whispered her name, Others didn't dare. The last time they'd seen Specter 2 climb like that, it hadn't come back. Yet here it was again, an outlawed ghost, cutting a silver path through the morning sky. The colonel stood at the edge of the runway, jaw clenched, watching the shrinking silhouette disappear toward the east. He didn't bother to call it in. Some debts, he knew, had to be paid in silence. Far out over the desert, as Specter 2 banked toward the Iron Pass, one of the dead radio channels flickered alive. A faint voice broke through the static, weak but undeniable. Eagle Team, still alive. The Iron Pass was a wound in the earth, carved deep by time and violence. From the ridgelines it seemed lifeless, but within its narrow arteries, 6 men were still fighting to exist. The SEAL team, known as Eagle, had been trapped there for 36 hours, cornered by terrain as much as by the enemy. The sun burned straight down, baking the air until it shimmered like glass. Their rifles were hot to the touch, their throats raw from dust and dehydration. Every few minutes, the wind shifted, and with it came the distant echo of movement. Boots scuffing rock, a metallic click. The hollow patience of men waiting for darkness to finish what daylight could not. Lieutenant Carver crouched behind a ridge of shattered limestone, scanning the valley through cracked optics. The canyon walls climbed like fortress walls, too steep for escape, too quiet for comfort. He glanced toward the radio lying beside him, its casing dented, the battery long dead. They had sent one last transmission hours ago, a desperate fragment through static. We're still here. After that, nothing. Command would have marked them as lost by now. Around him, his men barely moved. Vance sat slumped with his back to the stone, fingers worrying the trigger guard of an empty rifle. Ford's arm was wrapped in blood-stained cloth, the wound seeping through. Mason dozed and woke in cycles, muttering the same phrase over and over. Hold the line. None of them had eaten in a day. The medic's pouch was empty, except for a bent needle and a crushed packet of gauze. Carver's eyes drifted upward to the slice of sky above, a narrow vein of pale blue framed by red stone. No air covers coming, Vance said quietly. Not after what happened last time. Everyone knew the story. 2 years earlier, an A-10 had vanished inside this same canyon after diving to protect another pinned team. The pilot's name was Mara Keene. They said her plane never came out, that the mountains swallowed her whole. Some called her Specter. Others whispered she still flew at night, a phantom riding the thermals over battlefields. None of them had believed it, until now, as the ground began to tremble beneath them. Far above the horizon, Captain Mara Keene adjusted her flight path, the Iron Pass rising from the map like a scar. The sun glared off her canopy, burning through the dust that streaked the glass. The A-10's engines rumbled low, a sound she felt more than she heard. Warning lights peppered her console. Fuel 54%, left hydraulics unstable, flare system offline. She silenced them all. The machine was old, stubborn, and half-crippled, but it was hers, and together they'd already survived the impossible once. She thumbed the radio. Eagle Team, this is Specter 2. If you're alive, give me a sign. Smoke, fire, anything. Static answered, long and unbroken. She leaned forward, eyes locked on the terrain scanner. The Iron Pass spread beneath her like a labyrinth of death. Keene flew lower, letting the canyon wind shove and twist the aircraft. The A-10 bucked and groaned as rock walls blurred past her wingtips. She traced every contour from memory, knowing one misstep would turn her into wreckage. Her breath steadied. The engine settled into rhythm. Somewhere below, 6 soldiers were waiting, and she wasn't about to let them vanish into another set of names carved into a wall. On the canyon floor, Carver froze. A faint vibration pulsed through the ground, like the earth itself drawing breath. Then the sound came, a low metallic growl that grew into a scream, echoing from wall to wall until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The men looked at each other, disbelief warring with hope. Dust rained from the cliffs as the roar deepened. Ford's cracked lips twisted into a grin. "You hear that?" he whispered. "Tell me I'm not hearing that." Carver grabbed his binoculars and searched the sky. At first there was nothing but heat haze and light. Then a dark shape ripped through the glare, broad-winged, moving fast, sunlight flashing off its armor. For a moment, time folded. Every man there remembered the same sound from years before, the one they thought they'd never hear again. "She's back," Vance breathed. Above them, Keene spotted the movement. Tiny figures clustered in a pocket of shadow, surrounded by hot signatures moving on the ridges. She flipped the master arm switch, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon humming alive beneath her feet. "Eagle Team, this is Specter 2, she said, voice steady. "I've got eyes on you. Hold position." She dropped altitude, lining up her approach, every muscle in her body coiled tight. The A-10 shuddered as it caught the canyon's turbulence. On the radar, a warning blinked red. Heat lock detected, West Ridge. A missile had found her. It streaked out from the rocks, a white-hot spear of death chasing the sound of her engines. Keene's hands gripped the stick as the canyon walls rushed up around her. One wrong move, and both she and the men below would be nothing but echoes. The missile came fast, a white streak carving through the canyon like lightning trapped in stone. Captain Mara Keene didn't think, she reacted. Specter 2 rolled hard left, metal groaning as the wingtips scraped dust from the cliff. The warning tone in her headset shrieked as the missile closed in. She cut one engine, throttled the other, and let gravity take her. The Warthog dropped low, hugging the canyon floor. The missile lost its lock and detonated against the wall, a bloom of fire shaking the earth. Fragments slammed against her fuselage, cracking the canopy's edge, but she didn't flinch. "Nice try," she muttered. Down below, the SEALs saw the explosion ripple through the ridge and thought she was gone. Carver kept his eyes skyward, refusing to look away until a new sound tore through the air, the same mechanical snarl they'd heard years ago. "She's still flying," Carver whispered, disbelief cutting through exhaustion. Vance laughed once, dry and broken. "Guess ghosts don't stay dead." Keene steadied Specter 2. Her pulse matched the shuddering rhythm of the engines. Diagnostics scrolled red across the HUD. Fuel 42%, hydraulics unstable, flares dead. But the cannon was green. She dropped altitude, slipping between the rock faces until the shadows swallowed her. Enemy signatures glowed faintly along the western ridge, small, quick-moving shapes dragging launchers into position. They wanted her to climb. She didn't. The GAU-8 spun up beneath her, 7 barrels humming to life. She squeezed the trigger once. The Warthog's roar thundered through the canyon, a sound that made every man on the ground look up. Streams of 30mm fire ripped through the ridge, turning the ambush site into a storm of rock and smoke. The echoes rolled for miles, each burst a promise kept too late for mercy. The sky didn't come to save them. It came to finish the fight. On the valley floor, dust and fragments rained over the SEAL's cover. Mason pressed a bloody hand against his helmet, laughing through clenched teeth. "That's the Warthog. I thought she was a story." Carver shook his head, eyes locked on the trail of smoke curling upward. She was. Keene climbed sharply, circled once, and dove again. The cockpit vibrated,
instruments flickering, oxygen alarms pulsing. She silenced them. Through the haze, she spotted 2 more hot signatures setting up launchers on the opposite ridge. "Not this time," she whispered. The cannon roared again, short and precise. The impact flattened the ridge and erased the second wave before it could aim. The A-10 rattled violently as she pulled out of the dive, wings groaning from stress. Fuel dipped to 38%. Hydraulic pressure was bleeding away, and the left stabilizer trembled near failure. She knew she couldn't take another hit. Yet her voice stayed calm as she pressed the mic. "Eagle Team, this is Specter 2. You've got a corridor open. Move south by southeast, follow the smoke. I'll keep the ridges clean." Static answered, but it didn't matter. The canyon was alive again, and she had no intention of leaving it quiet. Far below, Carver signaled his men to move. They gathered their wounded, pushing toward the smoke trail curling through the valley. Above them, Specter 2 banked wide, tracing the canyon's edges like a guardian unwilling to rest. Her instruments screamed for retreat, but she ignored them all. The enemy still had launchers hidden in the east. She could feel it. The radar tone spiked twice, 2 separate heat locks, east and north. The next volley wasn't a single shot. It was a trap. Specter 2 was flying straight into a crossfire.
The radar alarm blared. 2 simultaneous heat locks, east and north. It wasn't random fire, it was a trap. Captain Mara Keene tightened her grip on the stick, forcing her breathing steady as Specter 2 knifed between the cliffs. The canyon narrowed into a funnel that left no space to climb, no room to turn. If she pulled back, both missiles would follow. If she kept forward, she'd have to beat them inside their own kill box. She chose forward. She rolled the A-10 low, almost skimming the canyon floor. Rocks blurred past her canopy like bullets. The first missile launched, a shriek cutting through the desert heat. The second followed half a heartbeat later. 2 white trails converging on a single point of light. "Come on," she muttered, throttling to full power. The aircraft shuddered under the strain, hydraulics screaming, metal flexing near its limits. The ground beneath her was a blur of red and shadow. One wrong angle, and she'd be part of it. Up ahead, the valley split in 2, a narrow fork twisting left then curling back. Keene banked hard, dragging the right wing so close to the stone she could almost feel it scrape. The missiles followed, relentless. She dropped chaff manually, worthless without flares, but enough to scatter the seekers for a second. The first missile clipped the canyon wall, detonating in a flash that shook her entire frame. The blast slammed into Specter 2, throwing it sideways. Alarms howled. Engine 2 coughed, smoke curling through the vents. Still, she held the stick. The second missile was still alive, weaving through the firestorm. Some fights aren't survived. They're out-stubborned. Below, the SEALs were on the move. Carver led them across the broken valley floor, guiding the wounded toward the southern ridge. They moved under the thunder of her engines, trusting the sound more than their own orders. Every time a missile hit rock instead of flesh, they moved faster. Vance hauled forward by the harness, shouting over the noise, "She's still covering us!" Carver didn't look back. He could hear it, the cannon's rumble, the crash of collapsing stone, the sound of hope made mechanical. Mara leveled the Warthog for one last gamble. The surviving missile was closing fast. Fuel, 35%. Right stabilizer trembling near failure. She cut power on both engines, letting the A-10 fall. Altitude bled away, 150 feet, 120, 90. The missile chased the dying heat, overshooting slightly. At the last instant, Keene reignited both turbines. The surge of thrust kicked the nose up, dragging the Warthog vertically. The missile struck the cliff behind her and vanished in a thunderclap. The blast wave hurled Specter 2 upward through its own dust cloud. Every bolt in the fuselage screamed, but the plane held. She broke through the smoke, gasping once, eyes on the horizon. The iron pass opened below like a wound stitched in fire.
Eagle team, you've got 2 minutes. Make them count. Static flickered. Then a voice answered, weak but real. Specter 2, this is Eagle. We see you. Moving now. Her lips tightened. That was all she needed. She turned the A-10 back toward the mouth of the canyon, keeping low to shield their retreat. Every system warned her to stop. She didn't. The old warbird was bleeding power, but it still had teeth. And as long as the men below were breathing, she'd stay in the sky. From the far ridge, a new signal blinked on her radar. Large, fast, closing in. This wasn't a launcher. It was another aircraft. And it wasn't friendly. The radar warning wouldn't stop. A hostile aircraft was closing fast, slicing through the thin blue sky above the canyon. Captain Mara Keene leveled Specter 2, the old Warthog vibrating like a living thing on its last breath. One engine trailed black smoke. Every instrument blinked red. She knew she couldn't outrun it, so she turned straight toward the sound. The enemy jet burst into view, sleek, modern, and lethal. Its nose cannon flashed, spitting tracer rounds that whipped past her canopy. She dropped the nose, feeling the air compress under the wings as Specter 2 plunged low into the basin. The shock of pressure popped in her ears. She switched power to manual controls, forcing the throttle forward until the lever trembled under her hand. "If you want me," she said under her breath, "come and get me." The first pass missed by meters. She saw the tracers rip through the canyon air, kicking up dust plumes as she banked hard right. The A-10 wasn't fast enough to dogfight, but it could outlast anything built for speed. Keene hugged the ground, weaving through the rock spires like they were cover in the world's oldest maze. The enemy pilot pulled up, circled, and dove again. The next volley shredded air between them, sparks glancing off her left wing. She felt every impact through the frame. Down below, the SEALs moved across the valley, dragging the wounded through heat and smoke. Carver caught a glimpse of the 2 aircraft trading fire overhead. "They've got her cornered," he said, voice tight. Vance grabbed a fallen rifle. "She's not the one who gets cornered." They pushed on, following the plume of gray smoke Specter 2 left behind, a trail that was equal parts guidance and warning. Keene pulled into a shallow climb, forcing the A-10 toward open sky. The enemy jet followed, climbing to line up a clean kill. Her radar screamed again, lock acquired. She cut throttle instantly, the Warthog stalling for a fraction of a second before dropping nose first. The hostile overshot, losing visual. Keene rolled the aircraft over and caught his tail in her sights. She didn't hesitate. The GAU-8 spun up, and the sky cracked open. The burst tore across the jet's fuselage. Its right engine exploded in flame. For a heartbeat, the other pilot fought to recover, then spiraled away, trailing smoke toward the desert horizon. She wasn't built to chase victory. She was built to make sure no one else died running. Her breathing steadied as silence filled the canyon again. Every muscle in her body ached, but there was no time to rest. Fuel sat at 26%, hydraulics bleeding. She could still see the SEAL's position, marked by dust clouds, small, fragile shapes moving toward extraction. She dropped altitude, running one more pass to clear their route. The ground rose up fast. She threaded between the rocks, cannon armed. A small cluster of enemy fighters appeared on her scanner, sprinting toward the ridge to set up a final launch. Keene fired in short bursts. The canyon lit up in flashes of orange and gray. The GAU-8's thunder rolled through the valley, chasing men who thought they had time to aim. The ridge disintegrated under the barrage, dust swallowing everything. Below, the SEALs ducked behind stone as fragments rained down. Ford looked up through the haze, eyes wide. He said, "She's clearing our way." Carver didn't answer. He was watching her silhouette carve across the sun. At the southern edge of the valley, Twin Chinooks appeared, rotor wash sweeping the smoke aside. Their blades churned the air into a storm. The SEALs stumbled toward them, half carrying, half dragging the wounded. The thunder of engines above and below blurred into one endless sound. When the first helicopter touched down, Carver keyed his broken mic out of habit. He said, "Specter 2, this is Eagle. We're boarding. You did it." Only static replied. But the static carried weight. It meant she was still there. Specter 2 banked over the ridge, giving them one final pass of cover. The control panel was a mosaic of warning lights now. Fuel 20%, hydraulics failing, right engine temperature critical. But she stayed on station until the last helicopter lifted clear of the dust. Then, for the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. Through the canopy, she saw the Chinooks fade west, small and steady, against the desert light. She tried to turn for base, but the throttle felt hollow. Pressure was collapsing. Both engines coughed once, then again. The horizon shimmered, heat rising off the sand like waves. Mara adjusted her harness, her hands calm, her eyes steady. "Come on, girl," she whispered to the old Warthog. "Just a little further." The aircraft rattled but answered, wings leveling for home. As the iron pass fell silent behind her, every system went dark, gauges flickering out one by one until only the wind remained. Specter 2 was gliding on empty fuel. The base was still 40 miles away. Specter 2 drifted through the haze, her engine sputtering like a heartbeat fading into static. Captain Mara Keene stared at the horizon, where the desert blurred into light, willing the aircraft to stay alive for a few more miles. Both turbines were starving. The fuel gauge sat on zero, needles trembling. Every warning tone had already died. The only sound left was wind rushing over metal and her own breath. 40 miles to base. Too far to fly, too close to quit. Below, the iron pass burned quietly. Smoke coiled from shattered ridges where the fight had ended. The SEALs were gone, lifted out by the Chinooks that now disappeared into the west. For the first time in 2 days, the canyon was silent. She wanted to believe it would stay that way. Keene trimmed the controls, coaxing lift from the dying engines. The Warthog floated more than it flew, gliding over the dunes like an exhausted bird tracing memory instead of instinct. Her right arm ached from strain. Her left boot was slick with hydraulic fluid. Every few seconds, she tapped the gauges out of habit, though she knew they had nothing left to say. In the cockpit glass, the reflection of her own eyes looked older than she remembered, steady but distant. Sometimes survival isn't about getting home. It's about making sure someone does. At forward base Tanager, radar operators leaned over their scopes, watching the faint trace of Specter 2 blink in and out of existence. "She's gliding," one whispered. The colonel didn't answer. He just stood at the window, scanning the empty sky. The wind carried the sound of approaching turbines, faint, uneven, but real. "Open runway 3, he ordered, "and clear everything that moves." Keene spotted the base through the shimmering heat, a thin strip of concrete carved out of dust. She lowered the landing gear manually, each crank protesting. The left strut refused to lock. She ignored it. The engines coughed one last time and went silent. The rest would be gravity. The Warthog dropped, heavy and unwilling, skidding across the runway in a storm of sparks. One wheel collapsed, dragging the fuselage sideways. Metal screamed. Smoke burst from under the wing. But the aircraft stayed upright until the slide ended in silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then she unbuckled, pushed the canopy open, and climbed out. The heat hit her like a wall, carrying the smell of fuel and scorched rubber. Ground crew ran toward her, stopping short when they saw her standing there, helmet off, hair streaked with dust, expression unreadable. She looked back down the runway, where the skid marks vanished into sunlight. "Specter 2 down, engines cold," she said softly into her dead mic, as if someone might still be listening. The colonel arrived seconds later, face drawn. "You weren't cleared for flight." "No, sir," she replied. "You understand there will be an inquiry." She nodded once. "Start it after they're home." He studied her for a long time, then motioned to the crew. "Get her debriefed, and someone fuel that damn plane." As they led her away, the hangar doors opened, and morning light spilled across the runway. Mechanics surrounded the battered A-10, touching its scorched skin as though it were alive. Someone whispered the name stenciled below the canopy, "Specter 2," and another voice answered quietly, "She earned it." Keene paused before stepping inside the command building. Behind her, the engines of another Warthog started somewhere deep in the hangar. The sound rolled across the base, low and steady, the kind of sound that never ends. She didn't turn around. Some legends don't need witnesses. The desert wind swept over the cracked tarmac, carrying the scent of smoke and jet fuel. Specter 2 rested in the sun, her metal scarred but whole, and above her the sky, clear at last, reflected nothing but light.